Doctors of Reddit, what is your most awkward experience when dealing with members of the opposite sex? NSFW. So I'm a little bit late, but I have something. I'm not a doctor, but a pharmacy technician. About a year ago, a young woman comes in very upset and turns in a prescription for a bunch of anti-anxiety and anti-psychosis medications. All is going well, until I realize we are out of one of them, and I have to tell her I have to order it for the next day. She was okay with it at first, but then I see tears building. I ask if she is okay and says yes, so I continue typing up the prescriptions. I want to say there was about 8 or 9. Next thing I know, she begins crying. She starts telling me that she was just released from a psych ward, and she had tried to kill herself a couple weeks back. She rolled up her sleeves and her arms were covered in deep cuts. She began to ask me if I thought she would ever get reaccepted to nursing school, because apparently they kick you out after getting admitted to a hospital for psychological symptoms. I had no idea what to tell her, except that I hoped she got in and that, if she worked hard they should give her a chance. I know this all may sound shallow, but I was not prepared for this. Nothing in pharmacy tech training told me how to react, so this was definitely my most awkward moment with the opposite sex. Posted about 2 years ago on a similar thread. 3rd year of medical school on my family medicine rotation which I'm doing on my med school's campus academic health center. Electronic medical record shows 24-year-old with chief complaint of cough, so I go in to interview her. Where it comes to light she's really there for vaginal itching. Finish up the interview and tell her I'm going to grab my attending for the pelvic exam. My attending tells me she'll let me do the pelvic if the patient consents. I had already done ob/gyn at this point and was quite comfortable with it, but we both agree I'd likely get asked to leave the room altogether. Lo and behold, patient consents. I do the pelvic, we write her a script for some antifungals, and she goes home. 2 days later, I'm teaching a small group of first year students how to perform an abdominal physical exam. Teaching is a requirement of the family medicine rotation, when, during introductions, I come face to face with my patient who never mentioned she was a first year student. We both play it off really cool at first, but during the session, her partner asks me to show him how to do an inguinal/femoral hernia examination on a female patient aka his partner. While I'm doing my exam, she breaks out in hysterical laughter which causes me to lose it and start laughing at the absurdity of the situation as well. She played it off like she was ticklish, and I said something stupid like I thought of something funny, don't mind me. 2 weeks later, she returns to the clinic for a follow-up, and I go see her. We talk for a while about how she's feeling, how awkward our second meeting was, and then just shoot the sheet for a bit when she goes, so when are you going to take me out to dinner? I politely declined and explained I had a girlfriend at the time and never saw her again. I did a pelvic exam on a girl who ended up being a fellow medical student, though 2 years behind me, and asked me on a date at her follow-up appointment. Working in at a large hospital without any pediatrics or obs/gyn. Just about to finish night shift when I'm asked by a nurse to quickly see an 18-year-old with abdominal pain. I was exhausted and didn't want to pick up another patient, but I just had a weird feeling. Went to see the patient. She was a thin girl lying in bed under the covers in the fetal position with her worried mum sitting nearby. I ran through a brief history and was about to examine when she stated she needed to go to the toilet. She looked to be in a lot of pain, so I asked for a nurse to escort her. At this point the patient, her mum and myself thought it was a burst appendix. Next thing I know the nurse yanks me down the corridor and shoves me into the bathroom. Before me stands a thin 18-year-old girl bearing down in a squat with a now noticeable baby bump repeating don't tell mum, don't tell mum, don't tell mum. I throw her in a nearby bed and charge into the resus area leaving the mum unbeknownst in her cubicle. I grab my boss who goes white and starts shouting why is she here? Why is she here and not the obstetric hospital? We run back and by which time she is fully dilated and pushing. We successfully deliver a beautiful baby boy while constantly freaking out about the lack of pediatric supplies. We didn't even have clips for umbilical cords but we improvised. Throughout this time the girl is either pushing or begging us not to tell her mum, while we keep saying she drove you here. You can't hide a goddamn baby. The girl wanted to keep the baby and ultimately we convinced her to tell her mum. I told the mum her daughter was safe, but there was something I needed to show her. The look when I brought mum into the resus room was unlike anything I have ever seen. Anger mixed with concern mixed with joy mixed with confusion. What point a crazy point faking point day that point was. TLDR some doctors structure their careers to avoid babies and vaginas but you can never truly get away. Being a resident in Saudi Arabia, there are huge stigma attached to male attendings examining female patients, especially those with gynecological issues. Also, being a foreigner residing here, some customs and practices catch me completely off guard at times. That being said, I was once in charge of my consultant's OPD during a obgyn rotation, said consultant having left early thinking all major cases and appointments had been dealt with, and left me to clean up any stragglers in the last hour. In walks a 40-ish-year-old mother with her 18-year-old daughter, both completely covered from head to toe in burqas, who then proceeds to throw a tantrum about how the consultant wasn't there for her appointment, and how she left a male resident in charge of the OPD. A cursory examination of the daughter's file didn't reveal any history which would have helped me decide if my superior should get involved. I then began to try to talk her down, asking her what her appointment was about and how I was in charge of the department. I didn't dare reveal I was just a lowly resident and I would do everything in my power to help her out with any issues her daughter had been having. After a lengthy conversation I find out that the daughter was there for virginity verification because she was to be engaged and subsequently married off that month, and appointments in my hospital's OPD are a beach to get, and they needed to present that certificate along with some others regarding finances, genealogy and a few others to the prospective groom during the engagement ceremony. I went completely numb, detached, examined the poor girl silently. She was in the stirrups naked from the waist down, and burqa above that, not even an islet, and discovered, for the first time, a stack of thick, extremely official looking certificates in a desk drawer, to be given to women who pass the examination. I have since performed that examination close to 30 times, and have seen quite a few females who didn't have an intact hymen, and actually sobbed quietly in shame during the examination. I try to explain to the family that hymen rupture is in no way a sign of promiscuity or even sexual penetration. To those people I know wouldn't understand, I just certify their daughter's virginities and tell the girl to come up with an excuse later on to their families. Damn, someone tells on me, and I'm gonna be facing one haluva malpractice suit. Edit, account a week old and already gilded. Can't thank you guys enough, you're one haluva cool crowd. And a big thank you to you, stranger, for the gold. I'm now gonna Google what exactly do I do with it. Edit 2. Idiots are idiots everywhere, no matter what country. You would not believe some of the shit that happens in India, Pakistan, or even China with women. This is a product of ignorance and plain douchebaggery, with vanilla selfishness at its center. I may have seen some crap, but I've met some amazing people too, with infinite love, wisdom, and courage in my days working in Saudi Arabia. Edit 3. Second gilding, I'm humbled, people. Edit 4. Only reason I use the term burqa is because it has been pretty internationalized in news and media, and there is instant recognition of the term by an international crowd. The actual term Arabs use is abaya, and a niqab, face cover, if they are traditional. Edit 5. Third time gold. I feel I haven't really done all that much, guys. I'm honored by your overwhelming support and encouragement, and to the person who gave me the gold, thank you, you're good people. General Surgeon, 31/F. For context, I work for a county hospital taking care of very salt of the earth patients. These are my people, as I was also born with a plastic spork in my mouth. Talking one morning to a young man who was about to get his inguinal hernia fixed, and his only question to me was, when can I have sex again? The only person with him was his girlfriend, who was smoking hot, so I broke him the bad news: you're gonna wake up feeling like a horse kicked you right square in the junk. So, go ahead and do what you want, when you feel like you want to, but it's not gonna be today. We get him to the, or, put him under general anesthesia, and then a very new, very young, very pretty female nurse starts to prep him. To those unfamiliar, this involves vigorously scrubbing down the groin, including the bonus and scrotum, with what amounts to a sponge on a hollow stick that dispenses a compound that decontaminates the skin somewhat. As soon as she starts scrubbing, the patient pops a raging boner. He's completely under and paralyzed, mind you, but the more she cleans, the bigger it gets, and yeah, this kid's a shower, I tell ya what. Poor thing, her face just gets redder and redder, and it gets bigger and bigger, and everyone's giving her shit the whole time. I finally stop her, because I'm afraid any second he's gonna break scrub and contaminate my field. We do our best to drape around old Ron Jeremy. It was hard. My poor, married with kids and straight as far as I know, male resident had to keep batting the damn thing out of our field during the whole case. Afterwards, I made sure to reiterate to the hot girlfriend that he probably wouldn't feel like having sex in the near future. She asked me point blank if it was okay if she blew him, and I told her to go nuts. He asked me the same question when he woke up from anesthesia, and when I gave him the same answer, he gave me a knuckle bump in reply. I love county folk. I'm not a doctor, but I'm a nurse that mostly deals with wounds. I had a patient once who had suffered from NSFL, hernia gangrene, NSFL. He had already been through surgery and reconstruction with skin grafts to the whole area, and I was seeing him twice daily to redress some residual but substantial open areas around his business, down the sides of his groin and thigh, up his abdomen, and on his scrotum. TLDR, the guy's dick and balls had recently rotted away, been skinned down, and then had donor skin from his thighs stapled on. At any rate, as I'm scrubbing away, my face about a foot away from his painfully swollen and misshapen bits, he becomes erect. I didn't even notice, because his edema was so bad. It didn't even occur to me that it would happen, because I was scrubbing the open areas and jamming tips under his foreskin. He moaned. I asked if he was in pain. He usually was, and he goes, well, no, it's just different. That didn't even clue me in. The wife had to mention something. Well, that's used fucking great. Long, but worth the read, and I am a real doctor. I was a senior resident supervising 2 interns on an overpass shift. For reasons that are beyond me, I got a call at 2 AM from the psych ward about a female patient with a bowel impaction that apparently could not wait until the morning. For the non-medical, a fecal impaction is a solid, immobile bulk of human feces that can develop in the rectum as a result of chronic constipation. Instinctively, I told one of the interns to head over there right away. However, he poo-pooed the suggestion, so to speak. I offered him a deal. If he did all the write-up and orders for the next 2 patients, I would take care of the bowel impaction. I thought he would at least take some time to weigh out his options or try to renegotiate, but there was zero hesitation. Realizing I got the bum end of the deal with the other female intern at my side, I headed down to perform a disimpaction. The nurses had prepared the young woman in the fetal position along with a pair of gloves, some lube, and a large disposable cloth for the discarded waste. Without further ado, I lubed up my fingers and dove right in pulling out huge chunks of stool from this woman. Usually, I can overcome these situations by breathing through my mouth. However, in this instance, smell had transcended into taste, and I might as well have been licking my fingers for lubrication. My mind began to wander. With each clump of rancid clay stool I added to the pile, I grew more demoralized. It was Saturday night, my friends were out partying, and I was literally up to my wrist in sheet. Around the 5th or 6th swipe, my FML moment disintegrated into a high-pitched scream of wrong hole that echoed through the unit. I wish I could say I had switched hands before that moment, but alas, my sheety fingers had inadvertently traversed her most sacred orifice. Within seconds my heart was thumping, and my scrubs were soaked in sweat. The rest is somewhat of a blur, but as I recall, after apologizing profusely, I had the nurses rig an enema to wash her out. I don't think I looked that intern in the eye again for the rest of the rotation. I can't remember what the patient had been hospitalized with, but I'm sure we both had post-traumatic stress disorder after that. TLDR, Saturday night bowel disimpaction edit, formatting. Second year med student. This didn't happen to me, happened to a classmate. Last year, we were learning how to do prostate exams on standardized, fake, Patients. Obviously, one of the biggest things about that exam is talking to the patient and not just poking away. Okay, if you could, bend over. I'm going to spread your bottom now. Okay, bear down, you'll feel some pressure and so on. We did this in groups of 4 people to a room, with one standardized patient. I didn't think anything about it, because it's something we'll all have to do at some point. Others were mortified. One of my classmates in particular just went for it. Patient is bent over on the table, classmate has a glove on, and has his finger greased up, and just went to plunge his finger into the abyss without saying anything. The patient reacted exactly how you would expect him to. Whoa, what are you doing? You've got to give a heads up before you do that. While my classmate stands there, finger out, mortified. Awkward silence followed, until one of the other people in the room finally said, well, looks like you got caught with your hand in the cookie jar. One guy had to leave because he was laughing so hard. Patient side of the story. I got a positive on a STD test, so to take the secondary test to make sure, I went to public health center located near me. The blood draw person was extremely cute, so when she drew my blood I was striking up a conversation, just to be friendly. She says, you're awfully cheerful for a person that doesn't know if you have a STD or not. I tell her, well, you'll let me know if I do. She gave me a smile and left. When someone came back, I shit you not, I was facing the other way and said something charming / flirty, only to turn around face to face with an old lady doctor. She even had a sense of humor and said, you can call me when you know you're clean. She was the kind of woman you can tell that used to be pretty about 20 to 30 years ago, but old age took its toll. I got embarrassed, asked for when to come back for results, and left. Week later I go back, see the same old lady doctor, and tells me I'm clean. I left before any awkwardness bubbled up. So, for reference, this story isn't about me. But if you want it to be about me, you can pretend it is. I'm a medical student. Prior to entering our clinical years we had to pass a few clinical skills courses which evaluated us on basic exam techniques including cardiovascular, abdominal, and general physical exam skills. Near the end of the course were the genital exams. First male, then female. Now where we go to med school is in a pretty conservative part of America. It's fairly white bread and conservative. I'm pretty sure some schools in the area have abstinence-only sexual health courses. I quickly left the fold. My buddy, let's call him Derek, had not. He was conservative. He never touched, much less saw a naked woman. In fact, as we began pairing off to practice first on the plastic dummies, he explained to me that this would be his first time seeing those parts. I tried to break the ice and asked him something along the lines of, well, you've seen them inborn? His awkward silence, followed by a shaking of the head, confirmed that, no, Derek had never seen a vagina outside of the anatomy lab and textbook pictures. Sheet. I decided to have my friends back on this. I'll go first, that way you can review the steps. Just think of it like any other exam and move on. I knew we were in trouble when we practiced on the plastic model and his hands were shaking. I asked him one final time if he didn't want to just postponed, and he told me he'd rather go through with it. So we walk into the room with an attending physician preceptor and meet the volunteer patient model. She's much younger than most of the models, maybe as young as we were, and I speak with her briefly and learn her story while the attending stepped out for coffee. Turns out she was a student and using the pay from this to help pay off rent and loans. The attending returns, and I volunteer to examine her first. Everything goes fairly smoothly with minimal blushing. Because it was an exam type setting, I stated what I was doing before doing it. I do this now, anyway, and my findings. Next up was Derek. I could see the little beads of sweat on his forehead. He scoots his stool up to her and introduces himself. Explains what he's going to do for the second time and has her lay back. He exposes her and says something along the lines of, I'm going to look at the outside. Looks good. Nearly catching himself from saying, good. Now we are instructed not to use good or other sort of value words. Instead we are supposed to say things like, healthy or normal, to avoid making the patient feel uncomfortable. As soon as he says it, I see him turn sheet white. The instructor is looking at her sheet. The preceptor is staring at her notes. I see it, though. But I'm not fast enough. Without skipping a beat he passes out, face first, landing nose deep in this girl's vulva, before sliding to the floor. I remember the girl just let out a little oof when it happened. The professor, a knob/gin, wasn't sure what happened, and I guess she assumed the worst, because she starts yelling, "Can we get some help in here?" before running out of the room. I have enough sense to pick up a towel and cover up the poor girl, before rolling poor Derek on his side before several docs run in to find out what happened. Poor guy had to retake the exam portion again. TLDR buddy passed out and Fassa planted vag. Not opposite sex, but I had a terrible same-sex doctor experience. I had to take a pregnancy test to receive the depot proverb shot. The first time you get it, they have to make sure you aren't pregnant to avoid lawsuits. I got a call a few hours later saying the test was positive, and I had to go back in 2 days to retest. The next time my levels dropped back to normal. When I went to talk to my doctor she said I had an ectopic pregnancy that ended up in a miscarriage, and it wouldn't have happened if you weren't having sex. She was very religious, and even though I was 20 at the time, and I'm a long-term relationship, she felt the need to express her personal opinions about premarital sex to me. I became very depressed, dropped out of school, had my records transferred, and 6 months later saw a new ob/gin. I told her what had happened, and she informed me there was nothing in my charts regarding a miscarriage, but there was record of a false positive pregnancy test. Long story short, my doctor told me I had a miscarriage. I dropped out of school due to depression because of it. Find out 6 months later she lied to scare me out of having sex, and it was a mistake, false positive. So I'm in medical school, and we are learning how to do our very first pelvic exams. A group of 5 or so medical students is in the exam room, and there's a volunteer lady in the stirrups, and the gyn attending is teaching us how to do it. In the technique he taught us, you put a glove on your right hand and you insert the index plus middle finger in the vagina to palpate. Your left hand, ungloved, is on the patient's lower abdomen. So he's saying aloud, for each us, what we should do. Now put the glove on your right hand. Now put some lubricant on. Now insert 2 fingers into the vagina with the gloved hand. So we are doing it, one after another, and it's getting pretty boring. And then a female medical student in our group is up to bat. The attending says the same things. Now put the glove on your right hand. Now put some lubricant on. Now insert 2 fingers into the vagina with the gloved hand. Then he makes a strangled kind of noise and says, "No, the gloved hand." In a nanosecond, all of our eyes zoom in on this lady's crotch, where the female medical student has inserted 2 fingers of her ungloved hand in there. Talk about awkward. These experiences both happened to me my 3rd year of medical school while on OBGYN. Both were with the same attending who was kind of an asshole. Anyways, it was a gyn oncology clinic, so mostly older women, after having some kind of cancer surgery where their organs were modified. I would go in the room with this guy and he wouldn't even introduce me to the patient. He would talk to them for 10 minutes and then tell me to do the exam. I'm usually very good with patients, but this guy had me off my game, because I never knew what the hell my role was other than stand quietly and do what I was told. The thing that was most difficult was that for a beginner it's difficult to know what you are examining and using the tools and swabs. Then on top of that these are abnormal vaginas and cervixes from previous surgery. The guy would then put me on the spot in front of the patient and ask about physical exam findings. The time I faked up I'll never forget. I'm usually very good at female pelvic exams and comforting the patient. However, these circumstances had me rattled, and in front of the patient and her husband, this attending and a nurse, I went to do a digital pelvic exam, and I accidentally almost stuck my fingers in the ears hole. The patient said to me, "No, that's the wrong hole." Oops. Late to the party, but here goes. 3rd year med school internal medicine rotation, was doing a physical on a patient that was a tall and pretty young woman in her late 20s. Go to listen to her lungs, and she's wearing a thick cardigan. Can't hear anything. Ask her to take off her cardigan. She had a collared shirt on under, so that I can proceed with listening to her lungs, and she blurts out, "For what? I don't see why you need me to take my sweater off." I got instant chills, not in a good way, as I was alone with her in the exam room. I immediately told her that I'm going to grab a nurse to proceed with this portion of the physical, as I wanted her to be as comfortable as possible. I left the room as quickly as possible and went immediately to my attending and told her what happened. She could understand that I was super freaked out at the way the patient reacted and apologized for not sending in a nurse with me. My attending finished the exam and came out and told me that the patient was crazy and that when she entered the room she was crying, which only freaked me out even more. Naturally I freaked out and thought, oh my god, she's going to lie and say I did something to her and my future is over. But in reality it turned out she had been sexually assaulted a few weeks prior and was still very uncomfortable with any man touching her. TLDR. Female patient freaked out on me for no reason. I thought she was going to try to sue me / lie to get me arrested. Turns out she was a victim of sexual assault. Not mine, but I remember overhearing some fun stuff when I went to the emergency room for a cat bite. Little bastards are like Komodo dragons. So I'm sitting in my little cloth cubicle, and between the cracks of the curtain I can see this little old lady in her 70s laying on a bed on the other side of the room. Her husband is next to her, and the nurse is asking questions. The nurse asks her if she's allergic to any medicine. Lady answers no. Any latex allergies? No. Then she asks the little old lady if she's ever had any surgery or procedures done on her breasts. The little old lady doesn't answer, and it's kind of obvious she's trying to hide something in her drugged up state. She lifts a little crooked finger and waggles it to draw the nurse in and mutters something. The nurse steps back and nods. Oh, breast augmentation. Okay. And the little old lady exclaims, he doesn't know well. It was hilarious. They were at that point where physical appearance is no longer a factor, so obviously the breast implants didn't matter to the husband. It was still really cute how concerned she seemed about it, despite the husband obviously not giving a damn. The nurse on the other hand was really embarrassed by the slip and apologized deeply before they told her not to worry about it. Nurse that works in a long-term care home here. I have a few, from people walking around naked to seeing a male resident fondling someone else. My favorite, it's 4 PM, and I'm going around giving out dinner meds to all my residents. I knock on one guy's door and go on in, like every other day. There he is, sitting in his chair as usual, nothing out of the ordinary. Keep in mind that this guy's harmless and usually just sits in his room and reads. So I walk in, and out of the corner of my eye I see his TV. And then I clearly see one chick going down on another. We are talking full on muff diving. He's clearly watching porn, and by the look of the spandex and fake moans, it's not even good porn. Turning to him, I ask what he's watching, and he just shrugs and says dirty movie. After a brief pause he adds, it's okay, I'm old enough. At this point I have 3 options: back out of the room and come back later, scold him for doing something I do on a regular basis, or just shrug and give him his pills. I chose the last one. Of course now he starts to get embarrassed and goes to turn it off. At which point genius me says you don't have to, it's nothing I haven't seen already. He chuckles and I leave him to it. In situations like this, I try to remember that my residents are adults. As long as they are still cognitively intact, there is no reason to shame them. TLDR, saw a patient watching porn, played it off like a badass. From the perspective of a patient, I was getting ready to go to college and was getting all the required tests / shots. Well, for some faking reason my TB test came back positive. It was one of those ones where they put the thing in your arm and you come back a few days later and they check it out. My doctor was all wide-eyed. She hadn't seen a positive test since med school and wanted to know if she could bring in some interns to look at it. It was just my arm, so I was like, yeah, whatever. Well, interns come in, and the doc was explaining what was up with my arm when one of the male students passes the fac out. The whole group jumped away from him, and the doc pushed me up against the wall to get me out of the way. Moment of chaos. They move me to another room while people figure out what's up. Turns out it wasn't my arm. The dude has epilepsy and had a mild seizure. Still, it was really awkward when he came in to watch my chest x-ray. On the upside, I don't have TB. I'm not a doctor, but a good friend of mine is a GI and told me the following story. As part of his job he does anal scoping. Basically puts a device up your bum to see inside. He is a very handsome guy, no homo, and the girls love him. He told me that one day a very attractive 40+ woman came for a checkup. It was a bit weird because she did the exact same exam a few months before, but he didn't think much about it. So he is in the room along with a nurse. There is always a female nurse when there is a female patient in the room. And he is doing his exam. The scope goes in, and most people will react with discomfort. This lady was also making some noises. He does his thing and a few minutes later, when he is done she sits up on the bed. He noticed she was a bit red and attributed to the discomfort of the checkup. After she leaves the nurse bursts up. This is so inappropriate. He is like, what? And the nurse says that the lady just had an orgasm. So apparently, she came over to get off on him putting a scope up her butt. Some people, I tell you. As a patient, I had a very awkward first pap smear. I was 19 and the family doctor was a middle-aged man. He comes in the room, doesn't really say anything, and puts on gloves. I'm mentally freaking out, but somehow he looked more nervous than me. His posture was stiff, and he was sweating, and he literally didn't say a word the entire pap smear. Didn't explain anything. I had no idea what was going on. No one had ever explained a pap to me before. All I knew was that there was a hand in my vagina and the doctor wouldn't make eye contact with me. When he finished, he bolted out of the room so fast that I couldn't even ask anything. I was supposed to get my breasts examined as well, but he didn't do it. The female nurse that was in the room during the pap ended up doing the breast exam. He didn't even come back in to give me results. The nurse did. It was so fucking awkward. I changed my doctor after that, but the new lady doctor works in the same clinic, so I see him whenever I go in. He's still my mom's doctor, and when I go to my mom's appointments he refuses to make eye contact with me. The whole experience must have scarred him more than it did me, lol. Not a doctor but the patient. Me 16 male. I have varicose veins in my testicles. I'm in the midst of many doctor's visits and such, to figure it all out. During each of these visits the doctor has to examine my balls, so dropping my pants to half-mast is becoming the norm for me, and so it's no big deal. One particular visit, the nurse is taking my blood pressure, temperature, etc. Asks what I'm there for, and I tell her. She then says, well, let's have a look. I don't think twice and pull my pants down. She then grabs my balls and closely examines them. Then, while she is holding my balls in her hand, she said something that I will never forget, and in hindsight puts into perspective the severity of the experience I didn't realize I was experiencing at the time. You must be very proud in a very flirty way, while holding my package, and on her knees with her head about crotch level. She then is done with her inspection and leaves. A few minutes later the doctor walks in, does his thing, and asks to take a look. In my naivety I explain to him that there is no need, because the nurse already did. His eyes literally popped out of his head. He stormed out of the room, and I hear him yelling at the nurse. Turns out she was fired on the spot. TLDR, I was molested by a nurse, but since I was 16 and dumb I was clueless and didn't mind. I'm only a medical student, but one instance comes to mind. I wasn't examining someone of the opposite sex, but kind of. I was in my first year, and I was precepting with an internal medicine doctor. I had been quietly observing her for some time, and had already took a class on how to do a physical exam, so I asked if I could examine the next patient with my preceptor watching. She agrees. I go into the next room with her, and introduce myself to the female patient. I make sure she knows that she can refuse my exam, but I have my preceptor with me to make sure I don't do anything too wrong. The patient agrees, and I start the exam. I check the skin, hands, lymph nodes, her eyes, ears, and mouth. Then I give her the gown and leave the room. I'm pumped. Everything looks like it is going well, and my preceptor didn't correct anything. I come back to check her breasts, and then go to do the gynecological exam. We go back into the patient, and I lift up the gown and there is a bonus staring right back at me. I say something like, oh, so you're a dude. Long story short, the patient gets mad. My preceptor tells me to go to the hall and wait for her, and then I get yelled at for being insensitive. In hindsight, it was incredibly insensitive to say, but I didn't mean any disrespect. I learned very quickly to look at a patient's chart before doing anything as simple as a physical. Heard this from my professor. He was working the knock shift in the ER with a nurse with whom he shared a mutual hatred with. Toward the end of the evening, she calls him up and asks him to examine a woman who has a foreign object in her vaginal cavity. He walk into the room and this 18-year-old is lying there with a blanket covering her legs which were up in stirrups. He has her scoot forward and the blanket falls off revealing a russet potato in her vagina. The ones restaurants use to make big fries. She is beet red and explaining how her and her boyfriend got a little experimental and things went wrong etc. He calms her down and is about to remove it as the nurse asks if he needs anything and he replies yeah, how about some sour cream, cheese, bacon bits naming off stuff for a baked potato. The girl on the bed starts laughing hysterically thanking the drive for making her laugh, but then the nurse writes him up for indecent behavior. TLDR former professor was working in a found a big potato turned sex toy in a young lady's vagina. I'm not a doctor, but here's one I've mentioned before. I had to go to a physical or something in the afternoon when I was in community college. I can't remember what it was all about. Health insurance or something. Anyways, I spent the morning shooting pool in the game room with my friends and girlfriend at the time. I convinced my girlfriend to give me a hand job in the bathroom before I left for the clinic. There's a handicapped bathroom that locks that I used to use. So, we are in there, and she starts rubbing me off. I started getting uncomfortable because it was so dry, so I told her to spit on her hand or something. No, that's gross. Fine, so use the soap, I suggest. She does this and it's weird. It takes way longer than it should have because it was one of those, are you done yet? Kinda hand jobs. By the time I finished, I had to zip up and run out to my car to make it to the clinic on time. A bit later, I'm sitting on the paper sheet after the nurse showed me to the exam room and left. That's when it hits me. Someone is going to be face first in my crotch. I take a quick peek and sure enough, the faking hand soap mixed with my sweat and crotch dampness and is slimy and semi-lathered. There's goo all over my boxers and schlang. It looks like I got a BJ from a camel, only it reeks like soap. I pull my pants up and the nurse or doctor who is going to do the exam walks in. I'm sweating bullets as I answer their inane questions, knowing where this is going. Finally, the moment of truth and they ask me to pull down my pants. So, I just want to say that my girlfriend gave me a hand job before I came here, and well, she used hand soap and I didn't have a chance to shower so all the stuff you see is just soap. Oh shit, I bet that sounded faking pathetic. Yeah, right, your girlfriend faking pervert. In a totally monotone voice they just said, okay, that's it. So I pulled them down, and they started poking around for whatever. I could feel the skin stick to everything as the junk got tossed around. I didn't look down. I stared at the knot designs on the wooden door. They always looked like eyes to me, always watching me as I sheet in the bathroom. Seeing all my shame. I was so down. It was my girlfriend, I swear. TLDR girlfriend gave me a soapy hand job just before a physical. Tried to tell the doctor why my junk was covered in white sticky foam. Not a doc, but a male nurse. In clinical rotations we had partners, and mine was also male. We both married and not gay, so we kind of stayed together. We had what we called job books. It was a list of tasks that you had to complete under a nursing instructor supervision and receive a passing grade to graduate. We are sitting in the break room in the surgical ward when an instructor comes in and asks if anyone still needs to do a female catheter. Don needed to do one still, so off we go. He reviews the patient's chart to verify the doctor's order and mumbles she's only 17. We walk into the room and introduce ourselves and explain the procedure. This young lady is gorgeous. I would have never guessed her to be 17, more like 20 to 23. Tall, blonde, blue eyes, well-toned and proportioned body. She could have easily been a model. Don asks her if she is comfortable with us performing this procedure and that there would be a female nursing supervisor in the room. She got all jiggly and said it was okay. Now, Don was a good looking guy, early 30s, fit, and just getting the first gray flakes in his hair that kind of gave him that distinguished look. He explains that she needed raise her surgical gown to her belly button and put the pad that he gave her under her bottom. We start getting the equipment ready. I'm giving him tips as I have already completed mine. We turn around and she is naked as the day she was born and still giggling. She wasn't totally shaved, just the landing strip. One more year and she could easily been on a Playboy calendar. I heard Don draw a deep breath. He then explained that he needed her to spread her legs and that he was going to put an antiseptic to clean her urethra and prevent infection and that it might be cold and uncomfortable. She's still giggling and spreads her legs wide. At this point I see sweat beads on Don's forehead. As he swabs her, she giggles and says, "Be careful, I'm still a virgin." At that point, Don took his gloves off, pulled the blanket up from the bottom of the bed and covered her, and said, "I'll be right back," and left the room. The instructor and I just looked at each other. We quickly excused ourselves and departed too. We found Don in the hall. All he said is, "I can't do it." The instructor, female, agreed that it was a difficult patient and that he would not be failed and would get another chance at a later time. This happened a few months ago. So I discovered I had a lump on old righty and wasn't sure how, but thought I should say something cause I didn't want testicular cancer. I ended up getting it checked out in my regular physical and the doctor wanted to set up an appointment for me to get an ultrasound. My mom works in this hospital that only has 30 beds, so she knows everybody, and Hippocratic oath or not, my balls were a pretty regular conversation around my house and the office until the ultrasound. I go into the ultrasound and there's this rather attractive older woman who introduces herself and immediately starts talking about my mother and how wonderful she is to work with, while at the same time asking me to disrobe. She then lathers up my scrotum with some bluish jelly while still talking about my mother, and just as she started to rub the ultrasound on my nut I got nervous and tried to change the conversation by making a joke. "So is it a boy or a girl?" She gave me the most deadpan look and then just started cracking up. Turns out I was, hopefully am still, cancer free, and she bragged to my mom how easy of a patient I was. TLDR got my balls jellied up by my mom's coworker cause I thought I had nut cancer. Way I highlights to this thread, but I have a couple. I'm an optometrist, looking at a pretty angry eyeball under the microscope. This guy is about 60 something years old, and his wife is sitting in the exam room with us, reading a magazine. I sit back and casually ask the wife if she wouldn't mind going back up to the front to make sure the staff sent all of the patient's old chart to me. This was all BS to get her out of the room, because her husband had chlamydia in his eye. After she left, I revealed the diagnosis to the patient. He nodded his head, and I asked, "Do you know if your wife has chlamydia?" He said no, he knew where this had come from, and he would tell her. I reiterated that he had to tell her, because she needed to be checked and treated also. Had a long time, 30-something-year-old patient who, at the time, was recently divorced. She apparently rewarded herself by getting a boob job. She sat in my chair and asked, "Notice anything different about me?" Well, yeah, clearly I do. You're now a 34G and wearing a tank top, but that came out professionally as you changed your hair. She replies with, "Nope, I got these." Up goes the shirt and out come the girls. Fearing the obvious lawsuit, I get up out of my chair, go get one of the techs, and have her in the room with me for the duration of the exam. No boobs are worth losing your license. Had a morbidly obese woman sitting in my chair who was unable to fit behind my microscope due to her stomach and very large chest. I was awkwardly trying to find a way to fit her in the equipment to examine her when she laughed and said, "Oh honey, here, let me help you." Unzipped her pants, let her gut hang down over the chair, lifted up her boobs, yanked the microscope table in, and tucked it in her fat, and plopped her chin in the chin cup. I just sat there and said, "Thank you." I only witnessed this because I was in the Navy, and in military boot camp medical exams, there was zero privacy. I'm not a doctor, I was just the next guy in line. There was a guy in our boot company that was maybe 5 feet 8 inches and had maybe an 11-inch business. He was a shortish black guy and the damn thing was one hand width above his knees. If he was feeling chubby, it was relatively intimidating. Anywho, the day comes for the testicular exam, shots, the whole gamut. They gave us paper to wrap up in, off a big roll. We're all lined up for the physical, and this smoking hot 30i Shell TJG medic is doing the testicular exams from a swivel stool at its lowest setting. When we were about 10 people back in line, I say to this guy that hot chick is gonna cup our balls. Man, how fucking cool is that? And it's been a while since we've seen a woman. He starts looking kind of sheepish and clutching the paper higher and higher up on his belly. He gets up to the head of the line and the LTJG asks him to open the paper wrap and he doesn't. He starts stuttering and telling her, "Ma'am, if I could just go to the back of the line." And she pursed her lips at him and jerked the paper down. Down flops his dick, swinging down like some kind of medieval guillotine of flesh, and it smacks her right in the center of the forehead. She got up, flattened her smock, and left the room 5 minutes later. She was relieved by a matronly lunch lady type. I never had the hot chick cup my balls, but it was worth it. Brazilian here. After graduating, I enlisted in the army to serve as a doctor. I was sent to the Peru-Brazilian border, in the middle of the forest, attending a platoon in a community with about 150 people, most of them military and their families. I stayed there for 14 months, about 4,000 miles away from my girlfriend, today wife. This means, no sex. Near the end of this period, one of the sergeants insisted that I should examine his wife. "Why, is she sick?" I asked. "No, just the periodical." Okay, no big deal. At the end of the usual examination, they asked if I could perform the gynecological examination too. "Are you sure? You know I'm not obgyn." "Yes, I'm sure. We are in the middle of nowhere, and you are the only one that can do it here." She was pretty, and had a beautiful macube. Her lingerie was really provoking. The pube, neatly trimmed. And I, thirsty for sex for more than a year. During the examination, they asked for advices concerning to the intercourse, safety of anal sex, etc. I answered all the questions with the best poker face I could. But no poker face could hide my ravaging boner. I tried to hide it bending forward, but it just got worse. As if my whole body was pointing to that tent, set between my legs. It was impossible to be professional at that moment. They seemed not to care. They just thanked very much for the medical advices and went home. If I recall, I think that was the most enduring boner I have ever had. I was 16 and my parents disapproved of the girl I was dating at the time. Few months later they discovered we were having sex. Big surprise, right? And made me schedule an STD test. Totally thought my girlfriend was dirty at the time. My doctor was a very cool 30-something-year-old man. Very trustworthy and humorous. My mother went with me to the exam, and shortly after the nurse getting my general info and readings leaves, he enters the exam room, oblivious to my mother in the corner seat. "Hey there, Jake. How are you doing today?" "Just fine, Dr. R. Just here for an STD test, just to make sure I'm all good." "An STD test? What have you gotten yourself into? Or I should say who?" As he gives me a fist bump, my mother interrupts with a loud throat clearing and says his skank girlfriend. Needless to say, but my doctor was the awkwardly silent one for the rest of the procedures, as my mother gave us both the most condescending demon stare for the remainder of our time there. As we go to leave, he slips me some condoms and says, "Be safe and don't get caught again." Female med student here. I was working in the we were out of adult rooms, so I thought it would be okay to use one of the pediatric rooms because it was just a patient with a laceration to his arm. So I called the patient in and brought him to this room with a tiny bed in it. I started asking him about his arm, and he was like, "I have a lump on my balls." I was like, okay. Then I realized that I had the wrong patient. They had the same names. Whoops. Anyway, I took a history, and then it was time for the examination. I couldn't get him on the pediatric bed and couldn't have him sitting on the chair, so I asked him to stand and drop his pants. I put gloves on, and the only way I thought I could examine him properly was to get on my knees and to palpate his right testicle. It wasn't that awkward until he started talking about how he could no longer get any erections after his transurethral resection of the prostate, removing part of the prostate through the urethra, and how it would probably be better off if they chopped it all off. All of this while I was still on my knees with my face practically in his junk. I kept a straight face and finished my exam while he kept telling me about his lack of a sex life. I'm a radiology trainee. One of the things I have to do is called a hysterosalpingogram. Insert a tube into a woman's uterus, squirt some dye in, and take some rays to see where the dye went. Usually we do it for women who are infertile, to see if their fallopian tubes are open. Recently I had to do it on a woman for the opposite reason. She'd had 4 or 5 kids and had a recent minimally invasive procedure to block up her tubes. I was supposed to prove they were blocked. So after the whole consent and establishing rapport, I put in the speculum and open the jaws and the walls of her vagina, flop in and fill the space. 4 kids, remember. I need a bigger speculum, but we don't keep any in the department. Usually doing this on women who've never had kids. I send a nurse to try finding a bigger one. The one she brings me is even worse. Try as I might, I can't see the cervix. If I can't see it, I can't put a tube through it. I have one try anyway, without success. In this situation, the OB/GYN trainee is supposed to come when we call and help us out. They do this many times a day. I do it maybe once a month. I make a few calls, eventually find someone who can come and help. I make small talk with the patient for the next hour while we wait for somebody to show up. Can't get in touch with any OB/GYN trainees again. Eventually she has to leave to pick up her kids. TLDR, I failed at examining a vagina, had to small talk with the owner of the vagina for 1 hour waiting for someone to bail me out, and help never came. As a new nurse, pretty much right out of school, I had only practiced Foley caths on dummies. And let's just say the plastic versions are not standing to attention. So being new and working the graveyard shift, I had an order to put a cath in a 90-year-old man who was being combative. Of course, breaking the newbie virgin. I thought, but a veteran nurse offered to be an extra set of hands. Thank goodness. As I got the equipment ready, the veteran nurse was pulling the covers down and chatting the guy up. Stuff like, "Aren't you just so lucky having such cute nurses all over you this late?" I was already turning beet red as I prepped his area. Well then, as I'm following sterile technique, a very graphic late night commercial about Girls Gone Wild starts up on the TV. Needless to say, I had to start the prepping all over. After about 20 minimums of trying to distract the gentleman, my fellow nurse just laughed and threw back up his covers while patting him on the shoulder. "Well, it looks like you've still got it, don'cha." She was a 4'10" petite old firecracker, that's for sure. She really helped me my first couple years. I just stuttered out of the room while she followed me out cackling. But yeah, I turned off the TVs in the future. I work in a hospital near my home as an emergency room tech during summers. This girl who I kinda flirted with in high school for a bit came in one day this past summer while I was triaging, and when I asked why she was there, she revealed to me pretty frankly that she had gotten a dildo stuck in her vagina and couldn't get it out. I just nodded, pretended that I had seen stranger things before, and rushed to get everything into the system before sending her back out into the waiting room. After that, I proceeded to grab a pillow and fall onto the floor, laughing hysterically into the pillow in front of the doctor and all of the nurses. About 3 hours later, it was a busy day that day. Poor girl, I was off tridge and doing other stuff when the doctor requested my help in removing the dildo. Imagine her incredible embarrassment when she bent over with pants down, saw me step into the room to assist the doctor. I go around, and lo and behold, there's this dildo completely in someone I had a thing for, still vibrating from at least 4 hours ago. I tried to casually mention something about doctor-patient confidentiality to try to assure her I wouldn't tell any of her friends about what happened. Needless to say, she avoided talking to me for a while after that day. It's a miracle we are pretty cool now. I, male, was on my OB/GYN rotation during medical school in an outpatient clinic and was asked to go see a patient who was new to the practice. I briefly look through the chart and see that she, the patient, is there to establish care and is pregnant early in her 3rd trimester. I walk into the room and see a woman who was in her late 30s. She had an obvious congenital defect, likely Noonan syndrome, although the chart said that she had no past medical history. There was a male who appeared to be 14 or 15 in the room as well. When I introduced myself to her, I asked her if he was her son, partly as the usual ritual of identifying everyone in the room when you see a patient, and partly to seg into asking her how many kids/pregnancies total she had, as this would be a pertinent part of her history. She said no, and I said, oh okay, well is this a family member? And she replied, no, he's the father of the baby. My jaw dropped. This kid had one of those attempted mustaches where there's like 13 hairs, and this woman was nearing her 40s. It didn't even occur to me until much later that it was possibly a case of statutory rap. She was just overall odd. When I asked her about her medical history, she said none. I was trying to get her to elucidate her obvious congenital issue, but she denied any problems at birth. She had no neck, was wearing black sneakers that had 4-inch lifts on them, and walked with a limp for God's sake. When I asked her how tall she was, she said she had no idea. Now, one thing you realize about super short or super tall people is that they almost universally know their height to the 1/4 inch. So to tell me that she didn't know just really confused me. When we measured her height, she was around 4'4". Also during obgyn, in a busy hospital in Chicago, while on call in the delivery ward, we would commonly have pregnant women who came in late at night with either vaginal bleeding or thinking their water broke. Because of the geographic location of the hospital, a majority of these women were African American, and a surprising majority of them were morbidly obese. In order for the resident to adequately examine their genital area, my job as a med student would be to pull back on her legs with all my might to keep them spread. I can't begin to tell you the smells I experienced. See, what happens is that these women sit down to urinate, the baby shifts and compresses her urethra and the urine stops flowing, and they stand up thinking they are done voiding. Once they stand up, the baby shifts again, and urine spills out, but they think their water has broken. So, instead of cleaning themselves up, they come to us, soaked in their own urine, and by the time they see us, it's been an hour or more. Luckily there is a very simple test for amniotic fluid, funning to distinguish it from other fluid. So we would just break the news that no, you're not having your baby right now, you've just pissed yourself, and have been sitting in it this whole time. Another lady I saw in the ER during residency for abdominal pain. The trig note said she had been offered Tylenol, but family at bedside refused it. I walked in and saw a female in her early 20s in the bed in mild distress with a female in her late 40s trying to comfort her. I introduced myself and said very nonchalantly, is this your mom? And the older woman said, no, I'm her lover. It threw me off, not because of the fact they were lesbian, but that I had just majorly put my foot in my mouth, even after I had told myself that I would never assume relationships after that other incident. She followed by saying, obviously upset, that's the second time someone has called me her mother. I apologized and continued. During my time in that room, 2 other people came in and said the exact same thing I did, and the older lady became visibly upset. Since then I have never assumed relationships. I always ask. There have also been times when I have called patients to give them pap smear results and they start thanking me for the job I did and tell me what a gentle touch I had, and some have gone on to say that it was the first time they had ever enjoyed a pap. Where did I learn to be like that? Was I married? Etc. But to me, it's more comical than awkward, because they probably had no idea how profusely uncomfortable I was performing the exam and that I was likely counting the milliseconds for it to be over. Seeing lady bits in that fashion is one of the worst parts of my job. Thankfully now that residency is over, I don't typically do that exam anymore. Okay, I've got one, but it's sure to be buried by now. Anyways, I was just back from the field in Poland after 30 some odd days. The entire time it was cold and wet and miserable. I also noticed I had some itching in my groin and my armpits, but I ignored it while I was out in the field. When I came back, I went to sick call to have it checked out. As I said, it was all around my upper thighs and my armpits, So I have to show the medic, young pretty female, that I flirted with several times in the past as we lived in the same barracks, all my business. She brings in the doc, and the doc is slightly older, but still an attractive female, and she's poking and prodding as well. Then the doc gets a look in her eyes, an excited smile, and goes and gets a black light. Turns out the light's in the office and turns on the black light to see if my rash glowed. There I am, buck naked, sitting in a chair, while the doc and a medic are staring at my junk, and my armpits to a lesser extent, and they bring in the rest of the platoon to see my unique condition. So like 15 people, both men and women, were in that office looking at me in all of my glory. Like I said, I worked with all of these people, same company, and lived with a lot of them, same barracks. That was unpleasant. We used to have standardized patients for genital exams. On top of that, they assigned 3 of us in a group, 1 girl/2 guys. I still remember entering the room for the male exam and seeing this pleasant 50-ish man. The objectives for the exam were prostate exam, hernia check and testicular exam. All 3 of us wore gloves. The girl in our group was not the brightest. I saw her glob on like 3 packets worth of lube for the prostate exam. During this ordeal, she manages to drip some lube off the poor guy's butt onto her heels. That was pretty disgusting, especially considering we could do nothing but watch helplessly. After we finished medically assaulting this poor man, I only had one thing in mind: don't shake his hand. He was handling his junk the whole time, and no, he wasn't wearing any gloves. What's the first thing this smart girl does? Sticks her hand out. Needless to say, both of us had to follow suit. There wasn't enough soap in our school's restroom to wash away that kind of shame. Not a doctor, but I was at the ER for a pelvic exam. I have a myarena. I was having really sharp pains, etc. Thought it might be falling out. Before the pap/exam, the nurse says the drive has a student shadowing him, and if it's okay for the student to be present. Fine, whatever, just tell me why it feels like I have an ice pick in my cervix. The nurse sets me up in the leg things, spread to the world with my open legs facing the door. In walks the doctor, followed by 8 to 10 students, vagina out for all to see. I freaked out and screamed when the fact did student become plural. He calmly asks if the nurse informed me he was being shadowed, followed by me glaring, legs still spread to a bunch of blushing students. Yay, a student, not a faking baseball team. No faking offense, but get them all the fuck out. Now. Never seen med students run so fast. But seriously, I'm not close-minded, but a bit more specificness would have been nice. I still would have said yay. Did I mention, while this is all going on, no one closed the door? Legs and vagina still on display. Quickest pap/pelvic exam ever. Called him a dick and told him to make sure his nurse knows how to properly inform people of stuff like this. I kinda sound like a dick, but I was in a ton of pain and then super embarrassed. I would like to share the most horrid story of my medical history that I had to share with my doctor after this all happened. His face was priceless. I had suffered from 2 ulcers my first 2 years of college, probably from being in college, and my doctor at home finally told me to cut the sheet and get an endoscopy, camera down throat to see damage, etc. I go into a very well established and highly regarded specialist office, wait an hour. I go to the back, lay on a Raleigh bed, and some people start telling me about how it all will be done. The only thing I remember at this point was they were gonna give me laughing gas, which made me fearful, because I have been told I say absolutely stupid shit. They put the mask on me and turn it on. Right after this group leaves, a lone nurse rounds the corner and starts speaking to me in Spanish. I don't speak Spanish. What in the hell? She looks down at her clipboard and walks away. A minute goes by, and I'm starting to feel the gas kicking in. She comes back, same board. Your colonoscopy will start very soon. I was going to say no, but I couldn't really think of anything to say. I was slowly slipping off, and all I could faking think about was this Spanish speaking nurse who was going to put a camera in my butt. Ulcers, guys, up in the ass. Not a doctor yet, but a medical student. Posted this response under dumbest question you've ever been asked. I'll just leave this here. Medical student here. I was interviewing a patient during my first year and asking the fairly generic questions we are practicing asking while taking a history of the patient's illness. I was speaking with a girl around her mid-20s and asking about her social history, drugs, alcohol, sex, etc. She was worried about becoming pregnant. A natural concern, to which I asked how sexually active she was, if she used protection, how many partners, blah blah blah. She mentioned that she was a virgin, in not so many words, but it became clear, and that she was seeing this guy and they were thinking of getting more intimate. Now, as a first year medical student, I was not really dying to engage this conversation much further, as I wanted to move forward and practice other aspects of the exam. But the patient is the most important person in the room, so their concerns are my concerns, and I wanted to address them as best I could. She mentioned that they had been engaging in oral sex, and then said, and like, that's why I'm nervous, because he wants me to swallow, but I don't want to because I'm worried about getting pregnant. To which I kind of fumbled out a reply of so you're concerned that you will get pregnant through oral sex alone? And she says, yeah, can't I get pregnant if he isn't wearing a condom while I'm doing that? I had to really gather myself and inform her that she was not in danger of becoming pregnant through oral sex alone, but via coitus, should exercise proper safe sex practices to avoid both pregnancy and sexually transmitted diseases. I still don't know if she was faking with me or not, but probably the dumbest question I've been asked. Patient: I was backpacking in CA, had a wonderful trip. About a week after I get home, I get rashes, and I'm itchy everywhere. Same thing with the other 3 in my group. It's poison oak, and I remember how we ran out of toilet paper, and I had to use leaves while we were out there. So my whole area gets huge welts and my balls/dicks swell up to gross proportions. My ball sack was about 4 times its size. I couldn't walk. I toughed it out for about a week, taking frequent showers to quell the itching. But I was very worried about my balls and dick, so I caved and went to my very cool prob lesbian doctor. I get in the room and guess what? It's intern day and the intern is a very cute young med student. And she gets to look at my deformed and enlarged dick and balls. When I pull down my pants, she gave out a gasp of horror. And at this point, it's been a week of me seeing this, and I'm very worried about perm damage. Hearing her gasp doesn't help my fear. My doctor just smiled, took a look around, and prescribed me some prednisone. The swelling started to abate the next day and my junk has been back to normal ever since. TLDR, my junk was swollen on cute intern day. Obviously not what the op wanted, but husband of doctor here. High fives all around. I've got tons of great stories from my wife and her colleagues. I think the best ones are from medical school. I think this is like second year in med school. Like actors/volunteers come in for basic physicals, etc. The students have to do a full exam, which includes listening to lungs and such. One especially awkward male student got a fairly well endowed female to exam and skipped the entire chest area because he was too afraid of her breasts. Yes, the patients are top, less for the exam. I believe this was 4th year in med school. My wife's good friend had an inner city male around the age of 13 to examine. She's a preppy white Irish Catholic girl. He was in with diarrhea, not sure if there were other reasons. So she's trying to make small talk and says, I like your grills. He says they're called frots. She continues with, they say poo. Is that because you have diarrhea? He obviously gets a little offended and says, no, it's my nickname. POOH, like Winnie the Pooh. This one is double not what the main question was, but still a good story. My wife had a young female, I want to say like 16, come in and she had to examine her. The girl says, while you're down there, can you check for $20? My wife is like, what? The girl says, yeah, I was in the club and the cops came, and you know how that goes, so I stashed it. Mama always said it's nature's best pocketbook. 3rd year medical student here. Story pretty relevant. We are always told never to make assumptions about who people in the room with the patient are. Don't address somebody as mom, dad, wife, etc. I always try to be aware of that. On my obs/gyn rotation, I had 2 weeks working labor and delivery. I walk into a room, to see a patient who just got brought up to the floor, and she's sitting there with a man about her own age. Hi guys, I'm Possum King. I'm a medical student here at the hospital, and I'll be checking in on you and helping out as much as I can while you're here with us. Before I ask some questions about the pregnancy, I always like to know who is who. Are you dad? Actually man, that's a really faking good question. Mom looked at me, looked at him, then looked down. I tried to move on as best I could, but the awkwardness was palpable. So I had a really sore ovary and I went to a relief doctor. It was on a bank holiday with my mom. I'm pretty chipper during the appointment because the current wave of pain had receded and I had probably about 20 minutes before it came back. So the doctor asks me if I shat that morning. I tell him I did and he asks me about the sheet. I have no clue how to describe my sheet to this man, so I say on a scale of diarrhea to constipated, it was about a 4, which causes me and my mom to giggle a bit. Doctor remains stony faced. Then my mom has to leave, so he can ask me about my sex life and all that. He asks me if I use condoms. I don't. I'm on the pill and in a long-term relationship. He looks unimpressed and asks me if I know the percentage of people aged 18 to 25 who have chlamydia. I have no idea, but I decide to overestimate, so he doesn't think I'm being flippant. I definitely overestimate. 60%. He tells me the answer, which was much lower. Can't remember it exactly, and I say, instinctively, oh that's good so. Glaring, he hands me a thing and tells me to go pee in it. TLDR, I'm a chipper girl with a grumpy ovary, and the doctor doesn't like it one bit. Obligatory not a doctor but. I just want to say something to this poor resident doctor I met once in the ER. I was in there for 11 hours vomiting. It's a hospital in French Canada. I still don't know exactly why I'm sick. 2 years later, Mr. Doctor, but I'm pretty sure now it's my gallbladder, because the last tests came back weird. Anyway, you were really cute. First, I apologize for giving you minx eyes through my sick stupor. I imagine it was not cute. After a few hours, you had to give me a rectal exam. I'm so sorry. I've never had one before. I didn't mean to look at you like you were a scary rapist. I swear I trusted you in that way. I was just worried for my bum. Please don't feel bad or awkward about that. Love, blonde English Canadian girl. I appreciate what you do. Back in medical school, I was rotating through gynecology, and during my first day in clinic, I was supposed to do history and physicals of all the patients and report to the attending doctor. Now I absolutely dreaded clinic, because most patients were old or rude and the physical was hell. However, there was one incident in particular that was different, and that experience is forever etched in my brain. I knock the door and she says, "Come in." Her voice was soft like butter and oh so feminine. I enter the room to find the most absolutely stunning lady, probably in her late 30s. She had long silky black hair, deep red lips that were so kissable, and her eyes were big pools of hazelnut. As soon as I enter, she bats her long dark lashes and gives me a wink. Usually the patients would be changed before I enter the room, but she was sitting on the examining table in sexy business attire complete with a short skirt and her long tanned legs crossed in front of me. I quickly sat down to conceal my growing erection. As I asked her about her history, I was entranced by her feminine tonality and the speed at which she sang. Finally, I knew the moment was here. "Mom, I'm going to have to do a physical exam. Can I please have you change into your undergarments while I leave you for a second? I will never forget what happens next." She giggles like a teenager and says there is no need to leave and proceeds to slowly strip her clothes in front of me. My jaws dropped, and after what seemed like an eternity, I was suddenly awakened by a loud knock on the door. Before I could react, my attending marches in, stares at the woman stripping in front of me, turns and stares at me, and the stares back at the patient. "Silly warbid one, my office." Now she shouts, before storming out of the room. I give an apologetic smile to the patient and meekly follow my attending to her office, trying not to have a heart attack. I almost pissed my pants. Before I could talk, however, the attending closes the door and says, "Well ain't that something," before kicking off her heels and slowly unzips the back of her dress. Now my attending was an older woman, probably married and in her 40s, but by no means was she an ugly woman. She begins kissing me and whispers in my ear, "Fuck me, please, wow wow wow." That was the only thing going through my head at this point. The two of us had amazing sex. I was surprised to find my attending had the best body ever and the tightest vagina I'd ever felt. When we were done, she brushed my cheek with her hand and I asked her, "So, should we see the other patients now?" "In a little bit," she replied. "I need one more thing though." "What do you need?" I asked. She replied, "I need about 350. Now it was about this time that I realized my attending was 9 stories tall and a crustacean from the Paleozoic era. Damn it, Nessie. That goddamn Loch Ness monster had got me again. I stood there screaming at her as she swam away into the distance. Or nurse here. This is kind of a long one. I was taking call one night and woke up at 2 in the morning for a general surgery call. Pretty vague, but at the time, I lived in a town that had large populations of young military guys and avid meth users, so late night emergencies were common. Got to the hospital, where a few more details awaited me. Perirectal abscess. For the STID, this means that somewhere in the immediate vicinity of the ears hole, there was a pocket of pus that needed draining. Needless to say, our entire crew was less than thrilled. I went down to the emergency room to transport the patient, and the only thing the nurse said as she handed me the chart was, "Have fun with this one." Amongst healthcare professionals, vague statements like that are a bad sign. My patient was a 314-pound Native American woman who barely fit on the stretcher I was transporting her on. She was rolling frantically side to side and moaning in pain, pulling at her clothes and muttering Hail Marys. I could barely get her name out of her after a few minutes of questioning, so after I confirmed her identity and what we were working on, I figured it was best just to get her to the anesthesiologist so we could knock her out and get this circus started. She continued her theatrics the entire 10-minute ride to the OR, nearly falling off the surgical table as we were trying to put her under anesthetic. We see patients like this a lot, though, chronic drug abusers who don't handle pain well and who have used so many drugs that even increased levels of pain medication don't touch simply because of high tolerance levels. It should be noted, tonight's surgical team was not exactly wet behind the ears. I'd been working in healthcare for several years already, mostly psych and medical settings. I've watched an 88-year-old man tear a 3-diameter catheter balloon out of his business while screaming, "You'll never make me talk." I've been attacked by an HIV-positive neo-Nazi. I've seen some shit. The other nurse had been in the OR as a trauma specialist for over 10 years. The anesthesiologist had done residency at a level 1 trauma center, or as we call them, knife and gun clubs. The surgeon was ex-army and averaged about 8 words and 2 facial expressions a week. None of us expected what was about to happen next. We got the lady off to sleep, put her into the stirrups, and I began washing off the rectal area. It was red and inflamed. A little bit of pus was seeping through, but it was all pretty standard. Her chart had noted that she'd been injecting 4th drugs through her perineum, so this was obviously an infection from dirty needles or bad drugs, but overall, it didn't seem to warrant her repeated cries of "Oh Jesus, kill me now." The surgeon steps up with a scalpel, sinks just the tip in, and at the exact same moment, the patient had a muscle twitch in her diaphragm, and just like that, all hell broke loose. Unbeknownst to us, the infection had actually tunneled nearly a foot into her abdomen, creating a vast cavern full of pus, rotten tissue, and fecal matter that had seeped outside of her colon. This godforsaken mixture came rocketing out of that little incision, like we were recreating the funeral scene from Jane Austen's Mayfair. We all wear waterproof gowns, face masks, gloves, hats, the works, all of which were as helpful as rain boots against a fire hose. The bed was in the middle of the room, an easy 7 feet from the nearest wall, but by the time we were done, I was still finding bits of rotten flesh pasted against the back wall. As the surgeon continued to advance his blade, the torrent just continued. The patient kept seizing against the ventilator, not uncommon in surgery, and with every muscle contraction, she shot more of this brackish grey-brown fluid out onto the floor until, within minutes, it was seeping into the other nurse's shoes. I was nearly 12 feet away, jaw dropped open within my surgical mask, watching the second nurse dry heaving and the surgeon standing on tiptoes to keep the stuff from soaking his socks any further. The smell hit them first. Oh god, I just threw up in my mask. The other nurse was out. She tore off her mask and sprinted out of the room, shoulders still heaving. Then it hit me, mouth still wide open, not able to believe the volume of fluid this woman's body contained. It was like getting a great big bite of the despair and apathy that permeated this woman's life. I couldn't faking breath. My lungs simply refused to pull any more of that stuff in. The anesthesiologist went down next, an ex-NCAAD1 tailback, his 6'2" frame shaking as he threw open the door to the OR suite in an attempt to get more air in, letting me glimpse the second nurse still throwing up in the sinks outside the door. Another geyser of pus splashed across the front of the surgeon. The YouTube clip of David at the dentist keeps playing in my head. Is this real life? In all operating rooms, everywhere in the world, regardless of socialized or privatized, secular or religious, big or small, there is one thing the same. Somewhere, there is a bottle of peppermint concentrate. Everyone in the department knows where it is, everyone knows what it is for, and everyone prays to their gods they never have to use it. In times like this, we rub it on the inside of our masks to keep the outside smells at bay long enough to finish the procedure and shower off. I sprinted to the central supply, ripping open the drawer where this vial of ambrosia was kept, and was greeted by an empty faking box. The bottle had been emptied and not replaced. Somewhere out there was a godless bastard who had used the last of the peppermint oil and not replaced a single faking drop of it. To this day, if I figure out who it was, I'll kill them with my bare hands, but not before cramming their head up the colon of every last meth user I can find, just so we're even. I darted back into the room with the next best thing I can find, a vial of Mastisol, which is an adhesive rub we use sometimes for bandaging. It's not as good as peppermint, but considering that over 1/3 of the floor was now thoroughly coated in what could easily be mistaken for a combination of bovine afterbirth and maple syrup, we were out of options. I started rubbing as much of the Mastisol as I could get on the inside of my mask, just glad to be smelling anything except whatever slimy demon spawn we'd just cut out of this woman. The anesthesiologist grabbed the vial next, dousing the front of his mask in it so he could stand next to his machines long enough to make sure this woman didn't die on the table. It wasn't until later that we realized that Mastisol can give you a mild high from huffing it like this, but in retrospect, that's probably what got us through. By this time, the smell had permeated out of our OR suite and down the 40-foot hallway to the front desk, where the other nurse still sat, eyes bloodshot and watery, clenching her stomach desperately. Our suite looked like the underground river of ooze from Ghostbusters 2nd, except dirty. Oh so dirty. I stepped back into the OR suite, not wanting to leave the surgeon by himself in case he genuinely needed help. It was like one of those overly artistic representations of a zombie apocalypse you see on fan forums. Here's this one guy, in blue surgical garb, standing nearly ankle deep in lumps of dead tissue, fecal matter, and several liters of syrupy infection. He was performing surgery in the swamps of Dagobah, except the swamps had just come out of this woman's ass and there was no Yoda. He and I didn't say a word for the next 10 minutes as he scraped the inside of the abscess until all the dead tissue was out, the front of his gown a gruesome mixture of brown and red, his eyes squinted against the stinging vapors originating directly in front of him. I finished my required paperwork as quickly as I could, helped him stuff the recently vacated opening full of gauze, taped this woman's buttocks closed to hold the dressing for as long as possible, woke her up, and immediately shipped off to the recovery ward. Until then, I'd only heard of alcohol showers. Turns out 70% isopropyl alcohol is about the only thing that can even touch a scent like that once it's soaked into your skin. It takes 4 or 5 bottles to get really clean, but it's worth it. It's probably the only scenario I can honestly endorse drinking a little of it too. As we left the locker room, the surgeon and I looked at each other, and he said the only negative sentence I heard him utter in 2.5 years of working together: that was bad. The next morning the entire department, a fairly large floor within the hospital, still smelled. The housekeepers told me later that it took them nearly an hour to suction up all of the fluid and debris left behind. The OR suite itself was closed off and quarantined for 2 more days just to let the smell finally clear out. I laugh now when I hear new recruits to healthcare talk about the worst thing they've seen. You ain't seen shit, kid. TLDR, don't shoot forth drugs into your taint. I used to work for the Air Force in one of their hospitals. Had a patient that I had to prep for surgery, ask her questions and find out her medical history, routine stuff. She was the wife of one of the officers in the commando group. She was decent looking, not really my type, but she had a gorgeous body. Well, I get the examination underway, and she starts being flirty, which I ignore and respond with coldness in the most professional manner I could. I finish writing. Surgery went well and everybody's happy, excepting me. Why? Because one of the brilliant nurses thought it would be nice and comforting for the patient to give her my cell phone number. Oh god, she went from patient to high order stalker in a finger snap. She really had the hots for me. And the funniest part of all this is that her husband had a reputation in the base for being extremely violent and very jealous of his wife. I ignored all her texts and her phone calls, about 15 of each, and became invisible for 2 weeks, praying that the guy never caught wind or found me in any way. Plus, his wife kept going to the hospital to ask me questions or get checkups on her surgery, which by the way, was a cholecystectomy made via laparoscopy, so she had 4 tiny scars that required no attention. Luckily he was being transferred to another place and that took them out of my path. Edit, his for her, for clarity. I dodge a bullet there, no pun intended. The guy was a real psycho from what they told me. So, not a doc, but I must confess my most embarrassing hospital moment. It involves Mexico, Lowe's beers, La Farmacia, and a street level bar that obviously had a deck 25 to 30 feet above a swimming pool. I'll get right to it. After Greg Laugan assigned myself, and literally smacking my back immediately after, I smack my back one last time. This was the big one. I'm very conscious, swim back to the top, and I'm seeing stars. Welp, it's time I call it for the afternoon. So I flounder back to my room and lay down, and then take an hour-long nap. The beers hit. I piss ugh. So refreshing but annoying. As I go to put my old buddy back under the covers, I clip my scrotum, whose new size is that of a mini basketball, so not good. Dare I shrug it off, but I'm kinda starting to figure out what happened. However, my buddies show up. Before I doze off again, obviously I have to show them the new pride of the tribe. We all agree it's hospital time. I'll fast forward to the second hospital visit, just for the TLDR. Yeah, when your bowel bag swells to that size, it looks like you have an erection. The doctor on duty was literally the most elegantly beautiful woman I'd ever seen, and wasn't much older than I. Worse come to worse, no ring. Okay, TLDR. Broke some blood vessels in my stomach jumping off a high diving platform of a bar in Mexico, and my balls swelled to such an admirable size. At the second hospital, I was treated by one of the most beautiful women I'd ever seen, all the while with a pretty lackluster boner. At the first hospital I got my prostate checked not only once, but twice. The second one was by a burly motherfucker with hot dogs for fingers. So not with that it was terrible. Had 2 surgeries. Didn't get a number. How did I like those apples? Fuck those apples, edit. Yeah, I had a 2-inch boner, while my future ex-dream girl gave me an ultrasound on my balls. I ended up with a hydrocele around one of my testicles, and had to wait 4 days to fly back home, because the elevation change was too risky for my sweet new balls/life. Flew home in hospital. Scrubs in a middle seat in coach to boot. Got a catheter out of the deal, so that was cool. No, I'll swallow a faking bag of chainsaws before I get another one of those, because of course, I wasn't blessed with a bored out vas deferens or anything. So I was doing my last day at an ob/gyn attachment, and was seeing patients in clinic. The last patient I saw worked in the hospital, but she was happy to see me, as I wouldn't be around her department for the rest of my training. I took the history, and did a full pelvic examination on her with the consultant watching, whilst she made jokes about being loose, and that she wasn't actually, but her husband had a small bonus. I think it was just nerves kicking in. I thanked her afterwards, and left thinking nothing more of it. A year later I was doing another specialty in the same hospital, and had to go to a different theater than usual to watch an operation. There in the theater stands this woman, whose vagina I had seen and examined a year ago. I try to ignore her, but she comes up to me, looks at my name badge, and says, "Oh, don't you look like that one from insert band name that I can't remember." I shrug off the slight flirting and she leaves. Then she comes back a bit later and talks again, and asks me where she knows me from. I'm not at liberty to say, as it would be giving away her patient information in an environment with loads of people, and could put me in an incredibly difficult situation. She keeps digging for the answer, which I keep saying I didn't think I'd ever met her before. Thankfully, as she started to really try to think where she had seen me before, the operating list finished for the day just at that time, and the surgeon grabbed me to do some teaching. I had never been so thankful of teaching before. I'm not a doctor, but my friend is, and he told me this story that has stuck with me for a long time. I'll probably get some of the medical details wrong, but you'll get the point. While he was in med school, my friend was part of a program that provided medical services to prisoners. One inmate came to him saying that he was having a problem with his ostomy bag. For those who don't know, an ostomy bag is an external bag that is attached to your intestines, and it catches all your piss and shit. So my friend removes the bag and sees that the nozzle area where the bag connects to the guy's body was badly infected. My friend then called in whatever supervising doctor was overseeing the med students, and he tells the prisoner that the hole is too infected to use anymore. The prisoner's response, "But you can't plug up that hole. That hole is my money maker." Basically, the guy was letting other inmates fuck his ostomy hole for money. At one point in my collegiate career, I was premed. Transferred colleges 3.5 years in. Big mistake. Was shadowing an urgent care facility. It's been many years and the doctor's name has passed memory. Looking back through my shadowing journal, and all I listed for this patient was adolescent female. This was over 5 years ago, and vaguely remember that she was 15 or 16. In a hoe, after going through history and symptoms, she is feeling a burning sensation when she pees. I remember understanding what was about to come next and letting the doctor know that I would be outside before I was able to leave the room, and to both of our surprise, the girl just dropped tro. Yep, exit stage left. Opposite side. Started getting serious with someone. Decided I should go get checked up. Go to the voodoo clinic on campus, and it's a female PA that will be doing by examination. Not only that, but damn, she is a cutie. To surmount this all, she also had a cute nurse in there too. That nurse was observing. That was the most difficult challenge I've faced. A patient, not a document. I had sex with different women in 1 week recently. The next thing I know, my penis is sore. This was to be expected, but my skin was red and chafed to the point it bled a tiny amount. The redness and soreness did not go away after a couple of weeks, so the first day off I had, I went to a doctor's office where you don't need an appointment. I'm a germaphobe, so I'm sure it's an STD. So there is this fat woman working as a receptionist. When we are done, I see her name tag. It's my coworker's wife. Then I have to see some medical assistant and tell her why I'm there. She looks like a hot blonde sorority girl. The other workers are hot blondes. The doctor was a MILF. She says, "Can I see it?" So I have to stand up and pull my pants down. Then she has me lie down and she pokes around. So I have to pee in a jar and draw blood. She isn't sure what's going on, but prescribes Voltrex for herpes. She says if I don't have it, it won't hurt me. So basically the whole office is discussing my case, and they are all attractive females except for my coworker's wife, who is also a neighbor. Next I have to go to the pharmacy to get the prescription filled, where there are more young attractive women. So eventually the doc's office calls in the home phone, even though I asked them to only call my cell and even wrote it down in a paper. So she said I'm clean. But before she had told me she couldn't test for everything. So to clarify, I after drove over to get paperwork to clarify. The paperwork had been out on the counter all day. Thank God I was clean, since they all knew. So after all the drama, what was the problem? Still don't know exactly. A reaction to the condoms, lube or spermicide maybe. She said it could have been like a diaper rash. So I bought stuff for diaper rash. That helped the skin heal, but caused pimples which made me worry again. This all would have been freaking hilarious if it was someone else. I'm not a doctor, but my story seems fitting. 15-year-old me had hemorrhoids due to domorific constipation Indian FOOD. Do my mum gets an appointment for me and warns me that I might have to have a prostate examination. YOLO, whatever. The doc was female, put her gloves on and lubricated. She said if you could get on the bed. Now, in my mind this meant bend over, so I'll enter the examination bed and exposed my anal hole to my mother and doc, assuming this was the correction position. It was not. To put in perspective, I bent over the bed like I was about to be taken anally. Clearly this was funny as the nurse, my mother and the PASSB laughed in hysterics and politely asked me to get on the table, lay down and raise my right leg. It's not over yet. I blush at it, and when I'm nervous I used to get really gassy. The moment she inserts I'll let it rip, and so commences round 2 of laughter. The beach loves to tell the story at family gatherings. Being a neurosurgeon, I came across a patient who came to during the middle of an open cranium procedure. It was extremely mortifying, considering this patient was a female, and she was almost spread eagle on the operating table. It turns out that her vagina was absolutely soaked with her natural lubricant as a result of the procedure, and it had leaked all over. So like what any other classy neurosurgeon would do, I unzipped my pants, ripped off my brain mechanic apron, and rammed her so hard her brain fell out. I destroyed her vag and killed her with my faking dick. When the aide attempted to pull me off of her, I picked the brain matter covered scalpel off of the operating table, as if I was about to knife this cunt in Call of Duty, Modern Warfare 2, because that was the last good COD release. I maintained a steady thrust into the throbbing womanhood of this now brainless woman, while doing a 180-degree turn with my hips, driving the scalpel into the female aide's lung. I'm a doctor, trust me on this. When the male aide attempted to stop me from fulfilling my deeply rooted and twisted sexual fantasy, I bashed his skull in with the business end of the Beretta 92 FS handgun that I always carry on me, because why the fuck not, right? Then I popped a cap into this brainless cunt's left tit, shot the security guard at the door and splodged all over the mangled corpse. I took one last look at my handiwork before I turned my temple to kiss the pistol. The brainless cunt's corpse was so disheveled that it had an uncanny resemblance to a golden retriever after being ran over by an 18-wheeler. I stood there, basking in the afterglow of the most beautiful orgasm I have ever achieved. It was time now. I pressed the gun against my temple, walked out the door, but before I could make outside to create a piece of modern art on the wall with my brains, a homeless man approached me. He asked me, "Hey man, you got tree fitty?"